Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindy Chavez. Today is Wednesday, March the 27th, 2019. It's 4 p.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 8 p.m. in London, Sydney, Australia. I believe that, that would make it 7 a.m. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm realizing that my video is cutting off the top of my head, so I'll see if I can adjust that. But this is a minor consideration because it's Neville Day, and we get to continue with our discussions about Neville, which is what we always do every week, Cindy and I. How you doing, Cindy? Having a good week?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing really, really good. I'm excited about this because this is always like one of my favorite highlights of the week is doing Neville. Neville's like,
yay!
He's like a dose now.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, well, there was a time when you had to kind of talk me into him. You know, like maybe about a year ago. This time of year roughly. And we did a special, I remember, on Neville, and it intrigued me, and then we kind of let it slip for a bit, and then last September we really started going for it. Or was it August? But somewhere around there we started really going through all his books and so forth. And yeah, I'm now hooked on Neville.
What I think is interesting is we did not do the Neville books that we've done. We didn't do them in chronological order.
Right, yeah.
And we decided to do this one because the other books were a lot shorter, most of them, and then this one was longer. So we decided to do this one, and it's the very first one, and it's really been interesting for me because I think I can kind of see the evolution of Neville's thoughts, starting back here at the beginning. So it's been kind of fun to see.
Yeah, you start to get that after a while, don't you? It's like it isn't just Bible verses after a while. After a while, you can see there's a stream of not just consciousness, but of awareness and clarity. Like there are certain concepts that he wants you to understand in a certain order, and once you get that, it all starts to really make sense.
It does. It's like it's not like it is learning a new language.
Yes, it is exactly.
We joke about the Neville decoder ring, but it's really true that once you kind of understand what he means when he uses certain terms, then it starts to become easy to understand, or easier to understand what he's saying.
So that's true. Everything does become easier. Now, well, I should say everything, all the concepts become easier to understand. It doesn't necessarily mean that reading the book is easy, because we're coming up on a chapter now that has a little bit of discomfort attached to it. It's not exactly the most comfortable title in the world.
On more than one level, huh?
On more than one level, yeah. But I'm convinced, because of what we know about the Neville decoder ring, that there is more to it than meets the eye when we look at the chapter name. And the chapter is called Circumcision. Okay, guys, calm down. I know how you feel.
We joked about it after the show last week, knowing we were coming into this chapter. I joked I was just going to wear a paper bag over my head.
Right.
The unknown comic, right? But actually, I don't think it's a long chapter. I think Neville's going to make some interesting points. I'm not sure I'm going to be in total agreement with Neville on this chapter. But we'll see what happens.
All right.
So, do we have any announcements we need to make, or any?
Not really.
No?
We have listeners kind of filtering into the live stream. Jason's saying hello from Michigan, but no, I think we're just kind of ready to go. We can do our PR announcements later on, in the middle of the show or toward the end or something. But for now, let's just go for it.
Okay. Well, let's dive in. We have been making our way through the book, Your Faith is Your Fortune by Neville Goddard, and we are in chapter 14. As usual, Neville starts out the chapter. If you think about it, when he's writing this whole book, Your Faith, he's talking about, I believe, on some level, he's talking about the Christian faith, because he's using Christian Bible verses for most of it. I think that Neville considered himself a Christian mystic, and he incorporated belief systems, not just Christian, but all kinds of belief systems, into his work. He has a very esoteric way of looking at the Christian Bible verses, and that's what we've sort of been breaking down, because neither one of us consider ourselves to be a Christian.
Right.
Although I'm very familiar with these writings, and you may be as well. But Neville defines things so differently than most of us were brought up learning. That makes the difference. So we'll start here.
Well, before you
Neville's
start,
chapter.
I said that there were no announcements, and after I said that, Jason posted a question. And it's not a Neville question, it's actually an Abraham question. So I figured, why don't we do that, and then we can start reading Neville.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so Jason asks, I'm just learning about the 68-second manifesting. Does this speed up the process, he asks. And you know what he's talking about, right? The 68 seconds for manifesting an actual thing. Abraham talks about how, I believe it was originally 17 seconds. If you focus on something for 17 seconds, then you'll get another thought on the same vibration as that thought. And then if you continue for another 17 and another 17 and another 17, that adds up to 68 seconds. So basically 4 times the original amount. And if you keep doing it that way, then something physical is going to manifest. That's what the 68 seconds is about.
Okay, well, to answer the question, does that speed it up? I'm not sure, anything that we can do to increase our focus will help bring things into manifestation quicker. Mm-hmm. I mean, theoretically anyway. But we all know that these things don't work in theory, they work in practice. So the idea is to, increase your focus. I've actually seen some people have created like timers online for, 17-second timers and 68-second timers so they can hold a vision for that amount of time. I think that if we just get into the habit of focusing on what we want, focusing on what we want to see, focusing on that side of the coin instead of on the other side, which is the lack of what we want and the things we don't want to see, if we'll continually pivot ourselves over to keep focusing on that, I don't think we have to worry so much about how many seconds we're doing it for. But to answer the question directly, sure. I mean, I think that that's the reasoning behind it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We always want everything to happen so fast, right? We want to speed it up. We want to bring it. We want to hurry. And, sometimes I think we'd be better off to like go with the flow and slow down a little bit, not get ahead of ourselves so much. I think Abraham talks about that, the buffer of time, that we all should be very thankful that there's a buffer of time, that we don't get what we think we want immediately every time, right? We'd be in big trouble if that happened.
Although we have a little bit to be concerned about there, believe it or not, because Louis de Souza, who keeps track of all the Abraham stuff for me, tells me that the 17-second rule is now down to a 14-second rule, according to Abraham. Because
I was going to ask you about that. I remembered hearing someone say that, the times are shortening, they're speeding up. So
yeah. And so 68 seconds is that's now 56 seconds instead of 68 seconds.
And we're under a minute, folks.
Apparently, exactly. Apparently it's attributable to the fact that as a global population, we're becoming more spiritually aware. Our vibration is lifting. It's increasing.
Okay.
And when our vibration increases, that means we're going to be more easily in tune with what it is that we're trying to reach for in our thought process. So we're going to get there faster, which is what Jason wanted. He wants to get there faster.
Right. Well, something that you and I have spoken about before as well, though, is the kind of the flip side of that. And that is, as the consciousness is raised of a collective, the contrast between that raised consciousness and the consciousness that's not yet quite there, the contrast is much greater. And so it can be a lot more uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So that's,
And we're seeing that. Just look in the world at all this, the controversy and splits and everything that are going on. And there's your indicator that there are some people who just aren't catching up as well as others are. And so, it does create more contrast. But contrast is good. That's what Abraham keeps assuring us.
Right. So that's what I was going to say. So as that contrast happens, it provides us with the catalyst that allows us to focus in a greater way, if that's what we choose to do, because of the contrast. So it's actually, even the contrast is helping speed things up.
Which is cool also.
Really interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
I also like to think about the whole thing as, it's not like we have to keep a stopwatch on ourselves. I mean, most of our phones do have a stopwatch built in, but if you spend your time looking at the stopwatch when you're trying to focus your thoughts, you're not going to be focusing your thoughts. So literally, that's not the way to go. So instead, the way I think about it is, I'm just trying to increase the vibration. The more that I focus on something, whatever that something is, the more the vibration increases. And it's kind of like a harmonic. When you have, if you have like a I don't know, a tuning fork, and you hit the tuning fork and it vibrates to the note A, and then you have another tuning fork across the room, it'll also start vibrating to that same A. That's the kind of vibration we're talking about. When we're building that vibration, that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you get that big enough, civil engineers have used that principle to bring buildings down when they want to do demolitions. That's how powerful vibration can get. So that's all you're really trying to do. You're just trying to keep building that vibration. Build it and build it and build it and build it.
And working to your focus, 7 seconds, it sounds like a small amount of time. It might feel like a huge amount of time if you're consciously trying to focus for that. Like, Walt, you were talking about last week about the previous spring when you were having the pain in your knees and you were trying to focus on the lack of pain. Focus on the part of your body that didn't have pain. And 17 seconds would have seemed like an eternity. So it's really just, to me anyway, the important thing is learning how to pivot.
Right, that's
every
actually more
time
important. You're right.
Thinking thoughts you don't want, to recognize, to be aware of it, to catch it right away. That, to me, that's the kind of the trick here, is not to be wallowing in thoughts of what you don't want, to catch yourself right away. Oh yeah, I want to think about what I do want, and pivot over to that. Then you'll collectively start getting mini seconds until pretty soon you're thinking about it most of the time, instead of the other way around, where most of the time your thoughts are focused on what you don't want. So I think that that's the key right there, is the awareness and being able to switch those thoughts.
Absolutely.
More important than having a stopwatch on it.
Oh yeah, much more important than a stopwatch. And also,
let Abraham keep time.
Remember, there are a lot of minutes in a day. And we're not just talking about 1 minute in a day. There are literally thousands of them in a day. There's just a huge number. So if you can actually focus for even a large chunk of the day on what you want, you're building vibration in a major, major way. So you don't have to worry about 56 seconds or 68 seconds or whatever. You just go for the vibration, go for the good feel, and keep pivoting.
Pivot. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and apparently...
Right, well, I hope that answered the question.
Well, he's thanking us, and he also laughed. So I guess, yes, we did answer the question. That's good.
All right. So are we ready to see what Neville has to say?
I believe we are, yes. So I'll get my Neville book.
Walt's got his book out. I'm reading online. I've got my book here as well, but a little easier for me to go on the computer. So Neville starts out, the title of the chapter is Circumcision, and he starts out a verse from the Christian Bible. He says, "In whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by circumcision of Christ." That's the verse that he leads off with. What sounds a little bit confusing.
No kidding.
But basically all he is saying is he's speaking to believers, he's speaking to Christians, and saying that they've been circumcised in a more spiritual circumcision. It's not made with hands, and it's not of the body. It's the circumcision that puts off the sins of the flesh. And then Neville goes to describe what he means by that, or what his definition, and he says circumcision is the operation which removes the veil that hides the head of creation. Now, I want to be clear about one thing, and that is, and it's not really what we're discussing, and yet this whole idea of physical circumcision that Neville's talking about out of the Christian Bible is actually a Jewish concept that's the sign of the covenant between the Jewish people and their God.
Yes, good point.
Now he's referencing it in a Christian fashion, and yet he's using his own definition. So we're getting 3 degrees or 5 degrees away from the actual thing. And he says this here. He says the physical act has nothing to do with the spiritual act. And I have a little bit of a question about that, because I always look at things through the filter of Hermetic principles. So as above, so below, right? Okay. As within, so without. So I'm thinking, well, the physical act, but it actually does have something to do with the spiritual act, because all of these things are always connected. There's always some kind of correspondence. what I think he's saying, he clarifies in the next sentence. He says the whole world could be physically circumcised and yet remain unclean and blind leaders of the blind. Okay, so he's saying just because you make some kind of mark on your body, that doesn't mean anything's changed in your heart or in your spirit.
Which is
true. I can agree with him there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he says, the spiritually circumcised have had the veil of darkness removed and know themselves to be Christ, the light of the world. So now we're getting into the real Neville stuff here.
And
where he's like...
This is where we have to start bringing in the decoder ring, too, because he talked about putting off the body of the sins of the flesh. We have to remember what he means by sin, because he doesn't mean what Christians mean by sin. It means an entirely different thing. It just means missing the mark. It just means didn't hit it. Got to correct my aim. So the sins of the flesh is the flesh missing.
No, you're right, and that's a good catch. That's one of those things I know people that are listeners to the Neville show, week after week after week. I apologize if you get really tired of hearing this, but it's really important for someone who hasn't heard it, and that is the idea of sin in the way the original language is actually written and the way Neville is telling us they're the same, and that is that, like Walt said, it just means you've missed the mark. It's like shooting at a target with an arrow and you miss the bullseye, or maybe you miss the target altogether. You've missed it. So what do? You just get out another arrow and you take a better aim. So when we as conscious creators have missed the mark, maybe we've gone out in the wrong direction, or we've tried to create something we decide we don't really want, or it doesn't really resonate with us, or it's not really true to who we are, then we just try again. We just revise it. That's what he is calling sin. And the forgiveness of sin, when he talks about that, he's talking about starting over, doing it over. Just a do-over. That's the forgiveness. You're making it right. You're aiming your arrow at a better target.
So now we have to tie in the concept of the blind leaders of the blind, because, again, I think we're talking about something a little bit different from what people would normally think. And I think that because the following sentence says, the spiritually circumcised have had the veil of darkness, and I think that's the key thing, that's where the blindness comes in, the veil of darkness removed, and know themselves to be Christ being imagination or consciousness. So doing a little translating going on here, we've got putting off the sins of the flesh, in other words, missing the mark, I guess with the flesh, I'm not quite sure where the flesh fits in there, and not remaining one of the blind leaders of the blind, meaning that we have removed our veil of blindness. We are now seeing clearly from a spiritual perspective, and at the same time understanding that that is the action of knowing yourself to be Christ, meaning knowing your own consciousness. So I'm not sure exactly how we tie that together, but you can see this is going in a direction that is not the way we'd normally expect it to go.
Right. So he is saying that once you've had that veil taken away, that you've recognized yourself to be Christ, or your imagination to be Christ, because he uses that as well. Mm-hmm. To your imagination to be God, your consciousness to be God, to be the creator, to be the power that that creates all things. Once you recognize that, then the darkness is removed. That's the process. That's the result of having the darkness removed. So then he says, let me now perform the spiritual operation on you, the reader. He says, this act is performed on the 8th day after birth, not because this day has any special significance. Now, as a Jewish person that knows the the Jewish verses, it does have a spiritual significance.
It does, yeah.
And an interesting aside is that medical science has determined now, in modern day, that the 8th day of a baby's life is the day that his immune function is strongest. His antibodies have risen to a level where he can have this operation performed on him with the least, possibility of infection.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
So it is interesting, but it's completely aside from what Neville's talking about. So Neville says the day has any difference from any other day, but it's performed on this 8th day because 8 is the figure which has neither beginning nor end. So Neville's apparently turned the 8 on its side, and it's now an infinity symbol.
Let's visit for just a moment. Let's just visit for a moment the Jewish interpretation of why it's the 8th day, because there is a spiritual significance there. I'm just curious to see, is there a connection that he's drawing between the way Judaism looks at it and this concept of infinity?
I don't see a connection.
You don't? Okay.
No. And it's fine, because he's not talking about this, and I guess that's the point I was making, is I don't see a real necessity for him to say it doesn't have any meaning, right? Because he's giving it meaning.
He certainly
so
is,
we can go with the meaning that he's giving. Why? Because he's the teacher today. And so he's telling us the way he sees it.
Okay.
So he says the ancients symbolized the 8th numeral or letter as an enclosure or veil within and behind which lay buried the mystery of creation. Thus, the secret of the operation on the 8th day is keeping with the nature of the act, which is to reveal the eternal head of creation, that changeless something in which all things begin and end, and yet which remains its eternal self when all things cease to be. This mysterious something is your awareness of being. At this moment, you're aware of being. Now, I love this. This part of the chapter I love. At this moment, you are aware of being, but you're also aware of being someone. And he says this someone is the veil that hides the being you really are. And I think we could talk about that for like the whole podcast almost, because we've talked about this before. If this veil that he's speaking of is the thing that's hiding the truth from us, is the thing that's keeping us in the dark, is the thing that's not letting us recognize the power we have within us as creators, the Christ consciousness or our consciousness or imagination. If this veil is hiding all of that, he says it's the awareness of being someone, that this someone is the veil. And we talk all the time about our I am stories. And I think many of those I am stories are anything attached to I am is the veil, because we've added something. The real truth is I am. And as soon as we make that, and he goes on, he's going to say it, you're first conscious of being. Then you're conscious of being man. After the veil of man is placed upon your faceless self, you become conscious of being a member of a certain race, a nation, family, creed. The veil to be lifted in spiritual circumcision is the veil of man. So do you get that sense of that that's where he's going? The more things we add to our I am statement, it's like those statements sometimes trap us into a very limited version of who we could be.
Yeah, I think you're definitely on the right track here for sure. The thing that kind of grabs my attention in his use of the word veil is that I actually think the word veil is a little bit misleading, but I'll go with his word. He's using veil to mean consciously placed limitation. Because literally everything that we think, everything that we create, everything that we do is based on limitations. We create a structure. A structure by definition has limitations to it. It has boundaries. And you go beyond the boundary and you don't have a structure anymore. The structure disappears. So it becomes a necessary part of how conscious thought works. Conscious thought is limit-based. And I think that's what he means by the veil. The veil is another way of saying the limit. Now what's interesting is he's turned this whole metaphor of circumcision into a way of saying, understand what's going on behind all those limits that we all place in our understanding of who we are and what our role is and so forth. Understand that there is a subtext going on there, and that subtext is the true essence of who we are. I think that's really what he's getting at. Right,
because he says the veil to be lifted in spiritual circumcision is the veil of man, but before this can be done, you must cut away the adhesions of race, nation, family, and so on. Mm-hmm. Then he quotes this verse, in Christ there is neither Greek nor Jew, nor bond nor free, male nor female. a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, freeman, but Christ is all and in all. You must leave father, mother, brother, follow me. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. There's a lot of controversy over what those verses actually mean. But I believe he's just saying, if you can't walk away from all of those, identifiers, it's not that we need to walk away from them, but we have to hold them loosely. We have to understand that we are a lot more than the labels that we put on ourselves.
Right. Those are those same limits that I was mentioning before. And
you had said conscious limitations, and the thing that came up to my mind when I heard you say that was, what about subconscious limitations?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, Neville has said it himself. From his perspective, the subconscious mind is simply another part of the conscious mind. So, of course, it has to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Good point. And so sometimes we don't even realize the limitations that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, no kidding.
So he says to accomplish this, you stop identifying yourself with these divisions by becoming indifferent to such claims. Indifference is the knife that severs. Feeling is the tie that binds. Now that's interesting because Neville's been teaching us about that the feeling is the secret forever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's talking about, and this is what I mean by it's funny to go back and read his first book, because I wonder how many things how many of his own beliefs evolved over time.
I think
he
so.
He says, yeah.
No, go ahead,
when you can look upon, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm blibbering.
When you can look upon man as one grand brotherhood without distinction of race or creed, then you will know that you have severed these adhesions. And that's really interesting to hear him say this, because he was writing, 80 years ago or something, right? Mm-hmm. 70 years ago. And we're seeing there's still so much division in the world.
Yep.
And he is saying when you get to the place where you don't see that division anymore, when you can just look upon man as one grand brotherhood without distinction of race or creed, you'll know that you've severed these adhesions. With these ties cut, all that now separates you from your true being is your belief that you are man. To remove this last veil, you drop your conception of yourself as man by knowing yourself just to be. Instead of the consciousness of I am man, let there just be I am, faceless, formless, without figure. It's a really, really powerful statement.
He ties
Is it really difficult?
The concept of circumcision into it now that he has got us down to, okay, strip away all the other stuff. I want to make a comment, too, about the word adhesions. I'll get to that in a minute. But now that he's said, okay, strip away all this other stuff, these outside layers, these veils, and now we're down to the core, to just the I am, the faceless, formless, without figure I am. Then he goes back to the concept of circumcision, and now it starts to become really clear what he's saying. Do you want to read that part?
Yeah, you're spiritually circumcised when the consciousness of man is dropped, and your unconditional awareness of being is revealed to you as the everlasting head of creation, a formless, faceless, all-knowing presence. Then, unveiled and awake, you will declare and know that I am is God, and beside me, this awareness, there is no God.
Yep, there it is. Now, I wanted to go back to the word adhesions, because I thought that was a really interesting choice in words, because he was talking about veils, right? That all these different conceptualizations that we put on ourselves are veils. And now he's referring to some of them as adhesions. What's an adhesion? It's something that sticks to us. We stuck it to ourselves initially, but now it sticks to us. Another way of saying a limitation, something that we've put up as a limit. And I think he kind of uses that word deliberately, because a limit is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I mean, in many ways, it's a good thing because it's how we form and understand our lives as physical human beings. You have to have limits in order to do that.
Correct.
Otherwise, you couldn't possibly be
Right.
a human being. Okay? So there's the good side of it. The bad side, if you want to call it a bad side, is sometimes we focus on things we don't really want, so we're creating structures we don't really want. And those are the limitations that are in the way, so to speak. When we talk about self-imposed limitations, those are the ones we're talking about, the ones that don't serve us anymore, that we're trying to move aside and so forth. So when he changes the verbiage around and calls them adhesions, what that says to me is like, okay, I've taped this little piece of me on. I've got this little piece on, this little piece on. This tape thing this is like, I like this one. Okay, this is me as man, and I am a man living in North America, and these are all my different characteristics. I like those. So these are the adhesions I like. I'm not so crazy about those, but because it's just an adhesive, I can just pull it up. It's not a big deal. I think adhesion was a deliberately chosen word because it's so easy to adhere or to take it off. It's not like it's permanently stuck for all time.
That's interesting. Well, I just assumed he used the word because in the physical surgery that is done, it's the adhesions that are removed. Mm-hmm. So I figured he was using it just because, but it's interesting to think that they are removable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's a choice. We can either remove them or not remove them. What do they serve us or do they not serve us?
Now this next paragraph and a couple of paragraphs, I've read through this once because I wanted to know what I was getting into today. And I think he kind of pushes the limit of being a little nebulous and vague, but we'll see if reading it a second time changes anything. He has just spoken about the awareness that there is no God, right, besides awareness, that awareness is God. And he says this mystery is told symbolically in the Bible story of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. It's recorded that Jesus laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. Then after washing his disciples' feet, he wiped them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Peter protested the washing of his feet and was told that unless his feet were washed, he would have no part of Jesus. Peter, on hearing this, replied, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus answered and said, it is washed, needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit. So you're already clean. You don't need to have your hands and your head washed. You just need your feet washed. Neville says common sense would tell the reader that a man is not clean all over just because his feet are washed. Therefore, he should either discard this story as fantastic or else look for its hidden meaning. Every story of the Bible is a psychological drama taking place in the consciousness of man, and this one is no exception. This washing of the disciples' feet is the mystical story of spiritual circumcision or the revealing of the secrets of the Lord. Jesus is called the Lord. You are told that the Lord's name is I am. Je suis. I don't know why he went to French there.
I have no idea.
I am the Lord. That is my name. The story states that Jesus was naked save for a towel which covered his loins or secrets. Jesus or Lord symbolizes your awareness of being whose secrets are hidden by the towel, the consciousness. The foot symbolizes the understanding which must be washed of all human beliefs or conceptions of itself by the Lord. As the towel is removed to dry the feet, the secrets of the Lord are revealed. In short, the removing of the belief that you are man reveals your awareness as the head of creation. Man is the foreskin hiding the head of creation. I am the Lord, hidden by the veil of man. So Neville's making the case that we are all God and that that part of us is hidden by our humanity, by our humanness, by man. When he talks about the towel being removed to dry the feet and all of this about, saying that the feet are understand. I think an easier instruction that our feet are the part of our body carry us through the world. Mm-hmm. We can have a clean body and our feet get dirty because we're walking on the dirt, through the earth, through the world. We're going through daily living. We turn on the news and we hear stuff that might not lift us up. right? We see and hear experiences that might not be aligned with the things we want to create. And so what do? We have to continually renew our alignment, renew our vibration, realize that that's not the stuff that I want to be being myself with, or whatever. I think that's a better explanation. I wish Neville were here to discuss this with me.
I hear you. Well, I'm also intrigued by his use of the towel as a metaphor, because he explicitly says that the towel is the consciousness of man. Now, Jesus, Christ, Kingdom of God, those are the ones that come to my mind. Heaven, those he's all equated with just pure consciousness. Towel, he's equating with consciousness of man. Man, I'm trying to ask myself, is that man as physical?
I almost think you could put being in there, right? That hidden by the towel, consciousness of being man, because that's the thing he wanted us to drop so often. He's saying, we start with this I am man, or I am human, and says drop that and just go with I am. Just recognize your faceless, formless being. So I'm not my hands and my feet and my body. I am is something faceless and formless that is the creator, that is more powerful. He's saying recognize that as your being.
Right.
Let this other stuff drop. So when he says, he's talking about being hidden by the towel, I think that's I am man. That's the consciousness of being a human, maybe.
Right.
The awareness of our humanity is what's hiding the secret.
So the answer to my question is yes, it's actually physical man. It isn't man as spiritual beings. It's the physical side of man. That's the side he's talking about. And
I think so.
If so, then I can at least begin to understand why he's choosing to bring in this idea of washing the feet. Because washing the feet is a physical action, and it is a way of spiritually tying the physicality of being and the physicality of feet and of body and everything else to this spiritual concept of consciousness. Because he does distinguish. This is consciousness of man as opposed to just pure consciousness. And that actually does fit very nicely with the rest of the chapter, because he talks about the veils, the little bits of pieces of who we associate ourselves as being that become these veils that hide the true consciousness within. So now, what is circumcision? Circumcision is just simply cutting all that away and going right to the core of who we are. And now washing the feet becomes just another way of expressing I am pushing all this stuff aside so I can go right to the basic of who we are. Okay.
And who we are is a faceless, formless being.
Which is interesting.
That's interesting.
It is interesting because that's exactly how man tends to paint God. I mean, outside of Neville circles.
Right.
Outside of Neville circles, that is what God is. It's this faceless, formless being. Well, he's just very clearly not only painted that picture of God, but said, you're it.
You're it. You're it. And can you please stop looking at all of the outer stuff that hides that from you and recognize that who you are is not limited to all of these physical characteristics and where you come from and who your tribe is and all of that. It's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. And if you allow that to, be cut away, allow yourself to see what's really in there. It's just the I am. That's a powerful thing.
Neville was a very creative guy. He was very creative. I mean, because clearly he was spending a lot of time coming up with metaphors. And he was inspired by the fact that he was a very devout Christian. So he was pulling extensively from the Christian Bible. That's very clear. But nevertheless, he was also taking these teachings and turning them into something that was not the way they were usually taught. That takes creativity. That takes a lot of, creating your own metaphors and so forth. And he really, he went to town. I mean, sometimes I think his metaphors kind of, if you'll forgive the phrase, they step on each other because you haven't washed the feet.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like Neville is trying to force a metaphor a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
But for the most part, I think his metaphors were pretty powerful, and I also think that they spoke in a powerful way to his audience. Because remember, he was holding these meetings when he was lecturing. His audience were Christians, so he was speaking to them a very deep truth and using their own language to make a point.
And I think he kind of had to go the scriptural route because not only was he speaking to a Christian audience, he was doing so in a Christian building. So, I mean, it was under the auspices of the Catholic Church, basically, that he was doing this.
Yeah.
Very interesting stuff. Well, we got through circumcision without dropping a blood. Well, a drop of blood, that was good, you know. That's quite a chapter, though. Wow.
So we are, I'm looking at the clock and wondering if you want to go into the next chapter.
Well, I don't know.
We have any questions or comments we want to address?
Not really. I mean, the last comment of significance was Jason responding to what we talked about in answer to his question earlier, where he says, I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of LOA, which is great. Congratulations. That's good, Jason.
Yes.
But no, nothing specific about Neville. So, yeah, let's go for it. Why not? I don't know if we'll get through the chapter, but hey, we can try.
We can try. So, chapter 15 of Your Faith is Your Fortune I really like the title. It's called Interval of Time. And isn't that something that we just had the first question be asking us about an interval of time?
Exactly.
Happens a lot on our show.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, it is LOA today, after all.
Right? So Neville starts out again with a Bible verse from the Christian Bible. He says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Okay, for some reason in my version, that same verse is twice, but I won't read it twice. He says, the me in whom you must believe is your consciousness, the I am. It is God. It is also, here we can add to the list of equivalents. Mm-hmm. It's also the Father's house, containing within itself all conceivable states of consciousness.
Now there's an interesting thought right there, because we just equated God and I am, which is consciousness. He's already described that, with the Father's house. Right? So now the Father's house is also consciousness, and the consciousness contains all conceivable states of consciousness.
It's very meta.
We got a little reiteration going on there.
He says every conditioned state of consciousness is called a mansion. This conversation takes place within yourself. Your I am, the unconditioned consciousness, is the Christ Jesus speaking to the conditioned self, or the John Smith consciousness. Want to pick that apart? He says, I am John. From a mystical point of view, is two beings, namely Christ and John. So if we sort of look back at the chapter we just read, which was talking about this very thing, right? It's talking about our I am, meaning that faceless, formless consciousness that we are, and juxtaposing that with I am man, or, I am woman, or I am mother, or I am a teacher, I am whatever, all the things we think we are. He's calling that the John Smith consciousness. Right?
Okay.
So he says, when our unconditioned consciousness, that faceless, formless consciousness, speaks to the conditioned self, or the John Smith consciousness, mm-hmm. They're having a conversation.
Yeah.
So I go to prepare a place for you, moving from your present state of consciousness into the state desired. It is a promise by your Christ, or your awareness of being, to your present conception of yourself, that you will leave your present consciousness and appropriate another. I really like this so much because of some other kinds of identity that I've done that include my present self in meditation, going back and speaking to a previous version of myself, a younger version of myself. Mm-hmm. what this reminds me of, because it's this conversation of that powerful creator, formless, faceless power, speaking to this awareness of our present conception of ourselves. Man is such a...
I'm also wondering something else, too. This may be just fanciful on my part. I'm wondering how he picked the name John Smith. And the reason I say that is there's a very famous explorer who, of course, was involved with the settlement of Jamestown. And the idea that he's an explorer, to me, that could be part of the metaphor. Right? Because what we're talking about here is the exploration of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So when he talks about, how does he say it? He says, your I am, the unconditioned consciousness, is the Christ Jesus speaking to the conditioned self, or the John Smith consciousness.
Yeah, I automatically was just assuming that he was using it as John Doe. Just a common
That's what
name.
I thought at first, yeah.
But it would be interesting to know why he picked that particular name.
Because this is a great big exploration. I mean, all of his books are a great big exploration of consciousness. And I don't know, maybe speaking of subconscious, maybe he subconsciously picked John Smith for that reason.
He says, man is such a slave to time that if after he has appropriated a state of consciousness which is not now seen by the world, and it, the appropriated state, does not immediately embody itself, he loses faith in his unseen claim. Forthwith he drops it and returns to his former static state of being. So it's like when we don't see it happen in 68 seconds, right?
Right, yeah.
We give up.
Yep.
We've talked about this so much, and the reason why is because we hear from people so often that make statements like, well, I've been trying and working on this, and, my thing hasn't shown up yet, so forget it. It doesn't work. And that's what Neville's talking about right here. And he says that this is being a slave to time. He says, because of this limitation of man, I've found it very helpful to employ a specified interval of time in making this journey into a prepared mansion. Wait but a little while. We all have cataloged the different days of the week, months of the year, and seasons. By this I mean you and I have said time and again, today feels like a Sunday, or a Monday, or a Saturday. We've also said in the middle of summer, feels and looks like the fall of the year. Mm-hmm. I'm laughing because we've all done this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Hopefully when you wake up and it feels like a Monday, you'll suddenly realize it's actually Sunday. He says this is positive proof that you and I have definite feelings associated with these different days, months, and seasons of the year. Because of this association, we can at any time consciously dwell in that day or season which we have selected. Do not selfishly define this interval in days and hours because you're anxious to receive it, but simply remain in the conviction that it is done. Time, being purely relative, should be eliminated entirely, and your desire will be fulfilled.
So Neville becomes a quantum physicist, because that's basically what quantum physics teaches, right?
Eliminating time entirely. Just eliminate it.
Yeah. Okay.
This ability to dwell at any point in time permits us to employ time in our travel into the desired mansion. Now we're time traveling.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now I, consciousness, when he says now I, consciousness, go to a point in time and there prepare a place. If I go to such a point in time and prepare a place, I shall return to this point in time where I have left, and I shall pick up and take you with me into that place which I have prepared, that where I am, there ye may be also. Let me give you an example, he says, of this travel. Suppose you had an intense desire. Like most men who are enslaved by time, you might feel that you could not possibly realize so large a desire in a limited interval. But, admitting that all things are possible to God, believing God to be the me within you or your consciousness of being, you can say, as John, I can do nothing. But since all things are possible to God, and God I know to be my consciousness of being, I can realize my desire in a little while. How my desire will be realized? I do not, as John, know. But by the very law of my being, I do know that it shall be. With this belief firmly established, decide what would be a relative, rational interval of time in which such a desire could be realized. Again, let me remind you not to shorten the interval of time because you are anxious to receive your desire. Make it a natural interval. No one can give you the time interval. Only you can say what the natural interval would be to you. The interval of time is relative, that is, no two individuals would give the same measurement of time for the realization of their desire. Time is ever conditioned by man's conception of himself. Confidence in yourself, as determined by conditioned consciousness, always shortens the interval of time. Mm-hmm. If you are accustomed to great accomplishments, you would give yourself a much shorter interval in which to accomplish your desire than the man schooled in defeat. If today were Wednesday, it is, and you decided that it would be quite possible for your desire to embody a new realization of yourself by Sunday, then Sunday becomes the point in time you would visit. To make this visit, you shut out Wednesday and let in Sunday. This is accomplished by simply feeling that it is Sunday. Begin to hear the church bells. Begin to feel the quietness of the day and all that Sunday means to you. Actually feel that it is Sunday. When this is accomplished, feel the joy of having received that which on Wednesday was but a desire. Feel the complete thrill of having received it, and then return to Wednesday, the point in time you left behind you. In doing this, you created a vacuum in consciousness by moving from Wednesday to Sunday. Nature, abhorring vacuums, rushes in to fill it, thereby fashioning a mold in the likeness of that which you potentially create, namely, the joy of having realized your defined desire. As you return to Wednesday, you will be filled with a joyful expectancy, because you have established the consciousness of that which must take place the following Sunday. As you walk through the interval of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, nothing disturbs you regardless of conditions, because you predetermined that which you would be on the Sabbath, and that remains an unalterable conviction. By the way, Neville, the Sabbath is Saturday. Yeah. Having gone before and prepared the place, you have returned to John and are now taking him with you through the interval of 3 days into the prepared place that he might share your joy with you. For where I am, there you may be also.
And the Seventh-day Adventists jumped up and down with joy, saying, "Yes, I agree with you, Cindy. It is Saturday."
Yes, well.
That's funny. A couple thoughts were coming to my mind as you were reading all this. The first being that when he is, let's see, where is it? This whole section here about how he projects ahead into time. What he's basically doing is, this is the first person I can think of. Abraham doesn't really do it this way. Seth doesn't do it this way. Tony Robbins kind of sort of does. Dale Carnegie doesn't. Napoleon Hill. Most of the gurus don't tell you how to place a specific limit on time. They don't tell you, attract it within X days or something like that. But he's giving you a specific formula for doing that.
And I like that he's saying, don't try to rush it.
Right.
Right? Like, a great example of this that comes to mind is when we wrote our book. You had a different vision for the amount of time it would take to get the book done. I thought you were out of your mind, right?
Well, I was.
But you came close to getting it done, because my experience and my, vision of how long something would take was different than yours. That's all.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense that a lot of times time really is the factor that makes a difference. Mm-hmm. Because when people say, well, I really want X to happen, but I just don't think it's possible. Maybe we don't think it's possible because we want it to happen too fast or in a time period that makes it seem impossible. So I just think it's a really interesting question to ask myself when I want a certain thing that seems impossible. If I say, well, if you gave yourself, enough time, couldn't it be possible? Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a really great hint from Neville, is to ask ourselves what a reasonable amount of time to make this thing happen would be.
Well, you made an interesting point also about me being out of my mind, because I think,
I really didn't think you were out of your mind.
But I think in a sense I was. I think that was actually a good thing, because literally, if I had stayed in my mind, I would have said it would take a year or whatever, like you would have expected, because that's what my mind would have told me. I literally set my mind aside so that I wouldn't let it limit me, and said, let's just plow through this thing. We can get this thing done. I have no idea how, but we can get this thing done. We can get this thing done in weeks. Well, it took a little bit more than weeks, but just because I was willing to put that particular limit aside, it has to take a year, then it didn't take a year.
And yet, here's the thing, is that one of the thought processes I went through in that was, okay, look, Walt's a smart guy. He knows how many hours he can devote. He knows how many hours are in a week. He's figured it out. So he's going with this time frame. Okay, hey, you say you can do it. What's interesting is we had different time frames in mind. So for each person, for everyone that's trying to use this method, this time travel method, now I know why I like Neville. See, I love time travel. Just be realistic about the thing. How long should it take? Because you know what, I have a suspicion it will come sooner most of the time.
Well, I would say it isn't even a question of how long do you think it would take. It's more a question of how much are you willing to allocate. How much time are you willing to give yourself?
Right.
It's a way of being kind to yourself and saying, take the pressure off.
Beautiful. Yes.
And that's
which
really
is so important.
Yeah. I think that's why most of the gurus don't say, put a time limit on it. They take the time out of it. They just say, like Abraham says, well, the universe likes to deliver things fast, so it really comes down to you. How quickly are you willing to let it in? If you're willing to let it in right away, it's going to show up instantly. If you're not willing to let it in,
and then when it doesn't, we beat ourselves up.
Yeah. And that's the point that I think you and I are touching on here, which is we don't need to beat ourselves up. It's okay to set a time limit. And I've always felt that. It really came down to, is the time limit there to serve us, or is the time limit there to hinder us? If the time limit serves us, if it actually feeds our ability to stay in that positive place, then great, set the time limit. Excellent.
I agree. I'm right there with you. I agree.
Yeah.
Beautifully made point. Yeah.
And I got to congratulate you.
Hey, this was a good.
We got it through. We got both chapters done within the hour, which is really, really cool.
Yay!
And with a minute to spare, so I can actually remind people, if they're not yet subscribers of the podcast, please become a subscriber. We made it as simple as possible. Just go to the homepage, loatoday.net. And now, Cindy, if they go to the homepage, there is one link at the top, and it's the one that's appropriate for their device. They don't even have to figure out which is the right link for them. So just click that.
Nice.
Walks them right through the process, and bang, just like that, you're a subscriber. And then, of course, be certain to share the fact that you're subscribing with everybody else when you hear an episode like this one that you like so much. So thank you for being a subscriber. And thank you, Cindy, for doing the research as usual to keep us on track with what Neville is trying to tell us, because, boy, I would not try to do this myself. You're good at it. You're really good at it. I really appreciate it. And I'm almost remiss. I almost forgot. I'm trying to make sure all of my co-hosts have the opportunity to tell people how to reach out to them. So how do they reach out to Cindy Chavez?
They can reach out to me. My website is cindychavez.com. INDIECHAVEZ. There's a contact form there. I would love to hear from you. It will be great.
Excellent.
Give me a shout out.
All right. Well, thank you, as usual, for leading us through Neville. Thank you to our live stream listeners and for the questions we got there. Thank you to our podcast listeners as well, and we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.